So basically, like I said, what I want to do is I want to just kind of show you guys how to sharpen up the forms a little bit, right? So we're not going to do tons new today, but it's going to be a bit of cool new tools for you guys to see that you can use if you need to. But right now, some of our stuff on this model is a bit soft, right? It's a bit rounded and organic in shape. And that's, even for this gear, we kind of want a lot of that. But what happens if you want to kind of sharpen the shape up a little bit? Well, part of that is actually having edge loops close, right, to the corners of other edge loops. The closer an edge or edge loop is to kind of a corner on a model, what it'll do is it'll take that rounding that the subdivision surface modifier applies, and it makes it smaller, right? So it's still doing that same rounding, but the size of the rounding is smaller, and so it kind of looks like a sharper kind of corner. So one of the ways you can adjust that, like I said before, is double left click, right? So if you're in 2 for edge mode and you double left click, it selects an edge loop, right? So you can select an edge loop, double left click. If you right click, remember right click will bring up your edge context menu. And in that is edge slide, right? I have a quickie set up for it, so if you're looking there and say, hey, I don't see S, I assign that quickie because it's a good quickie for it, I think. But edge slide. And when you activate this, you'll notice how it kind of lets you kind of drag that edge, or in this case, whole edge loop, along the existing kind of edges. And you notice as I push it closer to a corner, right, it sharpens up that area. So slide is really cool this way, that you can kind of move edge loops along the existing kind of surface. Slide it along there. Now, of course, I can add some more in. So Alt-C for loop cut. Remember, loop cut's right here. Now, remember, if you left-click drag, because I want to kind of put it this way, and I'm actually going to put some this way as well, but remember, your loop cut goes based off of the perpendicular to your edge, right? So remember, perpendicular is kind of edges at right angles, right? So it's going to kind of put it in to kind of go perpendicular to that shape, right? Now remember, if you left click, it puts it right in the middle, but if you left click drag, right, if I hold down my left mouse button, you see how you can slide your loop cut right when you're putting it in? So instead of just left clicking, which will put it right in the center, which is actually quite cool, if you hold down the left mouse button, not just left click, but hold it down, you'll see you could slide it. And you see by moving this edge loop closer to this corner, you can see it's kind of already sharpened up this shape on this gear a bit, right? Now, of course, I can even put it here. Like maybe I want this corner to be a little bit sharper. So if I left-click drag down here, you see how that kind of gets a little bit sharper there. And then if I left-click drag down here, you see how these kind of get a bit kind of boxier in form. So this is actually a cool little function of how a subdivision surface works, right? By putting this new edge loop in right here, right? We moved it closer to a corner, and so it's taking that rounding that your subdivision surface modifier does, and it's making that rounded shape smaller, and it has the effect of making it sharper. And so if I was to just like say right click edge slide, you see how as I move it away from that corner, that it gets softer again, and as I move it down closer, it gets sharper again. So particularly with a subdivision surface modifier on, when you put another edge loop in or slide an edge loop to be closer to corners of the mesh, right, of the object, it has the effect of actually making that corner smaller and effectively looking a bit harder as well, right? So if I wanted to, I could hit Alt-C and I could put a loop cut through there, and then maybe one more through there, and that kind of sharpens that up a little bit more also. And of course, if we want to, we can keep shaping parts of this as we go to make it fit closer. Right, so in this case, I can go to 3 for face mode. Remember, if you select a face, you can then go to select linked. That selects all of them, and I can say maybe hit W to move this in a little bit. Because those were kind of sticking out a bit far. So remember, you can always kind of bring those in a little bit more, and the clipping will keep that center edge loop, right, on the center. So pretty easy to make those adjustments when you need them. So that's kind of one way we can actually start to kind of sharpen up the shape a little bit. Something we might not need on the crab so much, but on this gear can be quite useful. Now, one of the other things I wanted to do is I want to show you the Inset Tool, because oftentimes gear will kind of have this little kind of ridging shape, right? Where kind of like maybe some parts of it stick out a bit. And there's a tool that can kind of let us get there. So in this case, I'm going to go to 3 for face mode, right? 3 for faces. And of course, I can hit Q, because remember, Q is your quick key for your selection tool up here. Remember that Q toggles, right? So if I hit Q again, it'll toggle it to box select, right? Rectangle select. If I toggle again, it goes to circle select. So remember, Q will toggle you through all those options up here. And that includes tweak. That includes regular marquee select. That includes circle select, which is what I want in this case, the one with the circle. Because remember, that one lets me left-click drag, right? I can just hold down left mouse button, and I can just move my cursor along. I think I'll leave those off, though. So if you just hold down your left mouse button and drag, remember, Shift will add, right? And you see how I can kind of just go in here and quickly just kind of paint select what I want, right? And that's very, very useful. Now, there is a tool right below Extrude, right? Because Extrude's right here. Right below that is one that kind of looks like a cube with a kind of a four-sided cube with a hole on its side. It's right below the Extrude tool, right? Extrude's right here, right below it. And it says Inset Faces. I is the quickie for that. That is actually a default quickie. I for inset. Inset is a lot like extruding. It creates new geometry, just like an extrusion would, but whereas the extrusion lets you kind of move it outward, inset kind of scales it inward, right? So I'll hit inset, and then middle mouse drag. Of course, there's a little plus you can grab on, but remember, middle mouse button will usually kind of do the yellow handle for you, or some version of it. So if I hold down middle mouse button, hold it down and drag, you see how inset actually takes those polygons, but you see how it creates new ones, but you see how it kind of scales them inward instead of extruding them out? Right? So I still have the tool on, so I've let it go, but I still have the tool on. But you see how it has created new geometry. See how there's a new row here? Just like Extrude would. But instead of moving it out, it kind of scales them in, creating this nice border. Now, this is the first time I'm going to show it, but way down here, kind of at the little bottom, right? The bottom left corner. I realize it's a little hard for you guys to see on there, but there's, at least for where some of you guys are sitting, there's in the bottom left corner, there's kind of this little pop-up menu that says Inset Faces with a little kind of triangle pointing to the right. If I click on that, it opens up the options for it. So it's kind of sits down here, click on it, it opens these options up. So not only can I adjust that thickness more right here, right? So if I want to play with that a little bit, I can. But you'll see there's something called boundary. Because you notice how it kind of insets here and it doesn't have those connected? So if you turn boundary off, it'll properly connect those along the center seam, right? So actually having boundary off is quite useful in this instance because of that. But you do have controls here, right? So I can kind of still interactively, as long as I didn't middle mouse click again, right? If I middle mouse clicked again, instead of going to here, it would do a second inset. But as long as I kind of just did the once and pulled it in, if I go down here and open this up, I can play with these options for it. So believe it or not, a lot of your tools will actually have options back down here in the left corner. There'll kind of be a little new pop-up menu that kind of appears right above the main bottom bar. And if you click on that, it just opens the options up, and unchecking boundary is useful. So it's unchecked because it does that. It makes this seamless here. Now, of course, I could switch to a different tool. So if I right-click, remember right-click will bring up your context menu. In this case, I'm in face mode. I have faces selected, so it brings up face context mode. You do have extrude faces along normals. Now, that's one of those things we have seen before, right? So if I do extrude faces along normals, I can drag up or down. You see how I can kind of extrude these out a bit or in, kind of depending on what you wanted for your crab creature. I almost feel like out will be a little more interesting. Remember that extrude along normals pushes each polygon out along its own direction, right? See, his polygons kind of face this way. These ones face that way. Those that way. That's what extrude along normal or that shrink and fatten do, right? So you see shrink and fatten down here. If I click on that and I middle mouse drag, you see that kind of basically does the same thing but without extruding, right? So shrink and fatten down here, and I've showed this a little bit before also, that moves whatever you have selected along its normal directions, right? Either in or out, depending on if you drag up or down. Extrude, though, does create new geometry. And of course, if I wanted to tighten this up a little bit, Alt-C for loop cut, I can put a little loop cut in there, and you see that's a little bit sharper now. And you can see how we can actually take advantage of this a bit, right? To just kind of make the armor a bit more dynamic, a bit more interesting, right? It's got a bit of a sharpened form to it so that it's kind of got some elements that are organic and then some elements that look a little bit more like a hard surface object. These are basically kind of mimicking the corners a bevel would give us, right? And remember, a bevel is a rounded corner. Pretty much everything that's a hard surface has bevels on it, right? If it's a video game model, you might omit some of those bevels just for polygonal efficiency, but then maybe you'd have a shader or it'll be baked into the normal map. But generally, it's a good rule to kind of have bevels on your corners because they should be in real life. So for me, it's always kind of a good default to do that unless there's a good reason not to, right? Like either the bevel's so small, we call a micro bevel, you'll never see it visually. Sometimes you'll see that in small parts of like your cell phones. But generally, you'll see the bevel having a sum effect, and it should be there in some way, shape, or form, even if it's just like as part of the texture or a shader or something like that. But even in subdivision surface mode, if you put edge loops right closer to the corners, it'll make that kind of bevel effect, right? So once again, if I just want to put a little bevel effect here, I could loop cut there, and then I could loop cut here. Remember, if you hold down the left mouse, but you could slide it. And so it just kind of gives us that nice little bit of kind of extra edge form there. And of course, if you have the tweak tool on, right? Remember, Q can take you through to your tweak. I can just move some of these edges down just to kind of tighten that area up a little bit. Maybe bring that one up a little more. Right? Remember, you can always adjust these as you go. 3 for face mode, and I can pull these faces out a bit. If I wanted those to be out there a little bit more, I can, right? And of course, you can go back to edge mode, 2 for edge mode. And there's lots of those little things that you could do to just make cool little adjustments. So that's a big part of what I kind of want to do for new lecture for you guys today, was just get to show you guys the Inset Tool. And the Inset Tool you could have actually used for your mouth, right? Instead of the Extrude. But the Extrude worked pretty well for us. We could just extrude, scale, move it around a little bit. Remember, though, when you use your inset, you want to open the options up so you can uncheck boundary, particularly if it's going to be something that you're insetting that's going to butt up against the center of the model, right? That's important if it's going to butt up against the center of the model itself, like with these. But, of course, extrude along normals, right? We've seen that before. It's cool. Slide tool, that's pretty great. But even your loop cut, if you hold down the left mouse button when you loop cut, it slides that loop cut. All right, so I think that'll be a great place to stop for that today.